She ran straight across the marble floor and threw her arms around his waist. "Grandpa, you promised you wouldn't leave without me." The old man almost dropped his paper cup. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Cutlery froze halfway to mouths. Every head in the upscale hotel restaurant turned toward them. He looked down at the little girl clinging to him. 6 years old, maybe. Designer dress. Polished shoes. Hair tied in perfect ribbons. She held him like she'd known him forever. I think you're mistaken," he said quietly, but she squeezed tighter. "I found you. Mommy said we would one day." Whispers rippled across the room. "Is that his granddaughter? That man? No way." He wore a faded coat with frayed cuffs. His shoes were worn thin. He didn't belong in a place where lunch cost more than his weekly groceries. The hostess had already asked him twice if he was waiting for someone important. Now security guards were moving. The manager stepped forward, polite but sharp. "Sir, is this your child?" "No," he answered honestly. The girl looked up, confused. "Don't say that, Grandpa." A camera phone lifted from a nearby table. Someone started recording. The old man's name was Walter. He came here once a year on this exact date. He would sit by the window, order the cheapest coffee, and stare at the entrance as if expecting someone. He had done it for 19 years. He had once been a factory worker. Long shifts, overtime, hands that had built things he could never afford. He had raised one son alone after his wife passed. He had sacrificed sleep, comfort, and pride to make sure that boy never felt small. But pride had destroyed them anyway. They had argued. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. His son had left with a suitcase and a burning ambition. Walter had told him not to come back unless he learned respect. His son never came back. At least not to him. Walter never stopped coming here because this hotel had once been a dream they laughed about together. One day, his son had said, "I'll own places like this." Walter had smiled then. Now he sat alone while the world whispered. The little girl stepped back just enough to look at his face. Her eyes were bright, certain. "You look exactly like the pictures." The manager's voice grew firmer. "Miss, where are your parents?" The girl pointed toward the entrance. "He's coming." As if on cue, the revolving doors turned. 2 men in dark suits entered first. Then another. The energy shifted instantly. Conversations lowered. The manager straightened his tie. Behind them walked a man in his late 30s. Tailored suit, calm expression. The kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. People recognized him immediately. Daniel Reeves, tech investor, real estate magnate, billionaire, the hotel owner himself. The manager hurried forward. "Mr. Reeves, we're so sorry for." Daniel didn't respond. His eyes had locked onto the old man. Walter felt it before he understood it. That familiar stance. The slight tilt of the head. The same eyes his wife once called stubborn. The little girl ran back to the suited man and grabbed his hand. "Daddy, I found him. Grandpa was right where Mommy said he might be." Silence. Walter's throat tightened. Daniel didn't speak at first. He just stared. The security guards stepped back instinctively. "You?" Walter managed. Daniel swallowed. "Hi, Dad." A collective gasp moved through the room. Phones lowered. Whispers turned to stunned silence. The manager blinked rapidly. "Dad." The little girl beamed, tugging both their hands. "See? I told you he was real." Walter's heart pounded so hard, he thought it might give out right there between the polished tables and crystal chandeliers. The son he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades stood 10 feet away, wealth radiating from him like armor. "You look, well," Walter said. Daniel gave a short nod. "You look the same." It wasn't true. Walter looked older, smaller. Time had carved lines of regret into his face. The little girl looked between them impatiently. "Why are you both acting weird?" Daniel crouched down to her level. "Sweetheart, give us a minute." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I waited too long already." The room leaned in. Walter felt every eye on him. He remembered the last words he had thrown at his son. He remembered the silence afterward. He remembered waiting for a call that never came. Daniel took a step forward. "I didn't know you still came here." "I never stopped," Walter replied. Another wave of whispers. The manager quickly signaled staff to clear nearby tables. No one left. The little girl looked confused again. "Daddy, why didn't Grandpa know me?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "Because pride is louder than love," he almost said. Instead, he looked at Walter and asked the question that had been sitting between them for 19 years. "Why didn't you ever try to find me?" Walter's fingers tightened around the paper cup. "I did," and just like that, the tension sharpened. If this moment already feels intense, wait until you hear what really happened between them, and why a 6-year-old had to fix what 2 grown men broke. Stay with this story. It's only getting started. "I did," Walter repeated, louder this time. "You changed your number. You moved cities. Every letter I sent came back unopened." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I never got any letters." Walter let out a brittle laugh. "Of course you didn't." The little girl looked up at her father. "Daddy, you said Grandpa didn't care." Daniel hesitated. The entire restaurant felt smaller. 19 years ago, Daniel had stormed out of a tiny apartment with a duffel bag and a head full of anger. He had built his first company from a borrowed laptop and sleepless nights. He told himself he didn't need anyone. He told himself he'd prove something. He did more than prove it. He sold that first startup for millions. Then another. Then invested wisely. Real estate followed. Hotels followed. This hotel followed. He told interviewers he was self-made. He never mentioned the man who worked double shifts to buy him his first computer. Walter slowly reached into his coat pocket. Security stiffened, but Daniel raised a hand to stop them. Walter pulled out a worn, folded photograph. It was Daniel at 12 years old, holding a science fair trophy, grinning like the world was already his. "I carried this every day," Walter said. "Even when I was angry. Even when I was wrong." Daniel stared at the photo. His throat worked, but no sound came. The little girl tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, why didn't you tell me he came here every year?" Daniel blinked. "Because I didn't know." That was the truth. 6 months ago, Daniel's wife had discovered old storage boxes while reorganizing their home. Letters addressed to Daniel. Unopened. Returned to sender stamps. Dates going back nearly 2 decades. She confronted him. He had no answer. Then their daughter overheard. "Why didn't Grandpa try harder?" she had asked. "He did," his wife had corrected quietly. The little girl had taken matters into her own hands. She memorized the hotel's name from the return addresses. She insisted they visit on the date printed on the earliest letter. Daniel came today expecting closure. He didn't expect confrontation in the middle of a restaurant. "I was told you wanted nothing to do with me," Daniel said finally. Walter's shoulders sagged. "I was told you said I was dead to you." Daniel looked stunned. "I never said that." Silence. Someone had lied. The tension thickened. The manager, who minutes ago had been ready to escort Walter out, now stood awkwardly beside the table. "Mr. Reeves, should we prepare the private lounge?" Daniel didn't answer. Walter looked around at the guests who had judged him minutes earlier. Their faces now held fascination, discomfort, even guilt. The little girl slipped her small hand into Walter's. "Grandpa, are you poor?" gasped. Walter smiled faintly. "Not really." Daniel looked at his daughter. "Sweetheart," she interrupted. "Because Mommy says being rich means having people who love you." The words hit harder than any accusation. Walter's eyes watered, but he didn't let the tears fall. Daniel stood straight. "Everyone, thank you. We'll handle this privately." But Walter shook his head. "No." Daniel frowned. "Dad, you built your empire in public," Walter said. "You can fix this in public." Another escalation. Phones came back out. Daniel studied his father carefully. This wasn't the timid man from his memory. This was someone who had endured 19 years of silence and still showed up. "Why here?" Daniel asked quietly. Walter exhaled slowly. "Because this was your dream. You said one day you'd bring me here, sit at the best table, and tell me I could finally stop working. Daniel's composure cracked for the first time. I wanted to, he admitted. What stopped you? Walter pressed. Pride, fear, shame. Daniel had built companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals, fired executives without hesitation. But calling his father felt harder than any boardroom decision. The little girl looked between them, frustrated. Why are grown-ups so bad at saying sorry? A few people actually chuckled nervously. Daniel knelt in front of Walter. The move alone sent shockwaves through the room. You think I didn't wait for you to show up? Daniel asked. Every award ceremony, every product launch, I kept hoping you'd walk through the door. Walter's voice trembled. I didn't know I was invited. The words landed like a hammer. Because Daniel had made it clear 19 years ago, don't come. He had meant it in anger. Walter had taken it as final. The little girl squeezed both their hands again. Then say it now. Daniel looked up at his father. For a second, the billionaire disappeared. He was just a son again. Come, Daniel said softly. Please. Walter swallowed hard. Around them, the restaurant was utterly silent. You're still watching this moment unfold. You already feel it, the weight of years collapsing into seconds. But what happened next changed not just their relationship. It changed how everyone in that room saw wealth forever. Stay with the story. The biggest shift is about to happen. Walter didn't answer right away. He searched Daniel's face the way he used to when his son was small and tried to hide a broken lamp behind his back. Back then, he could read him easily. Now the face was sharper, guarded, shaped by power and pressure. Come where? Walter asked quietly. Daniel stood slowly. Home. The word echoed. Home. For 19 years, that word had meant two different things to two different men. Walter cleared his throat. You left home. Daniel's jaw flexed. Because I felt like I wasn't enough. The confession startled even him. Walter blinked. You were everything. No, Daniel said louder now. It was a dream you couldn't afford. And I knew it. Murmurs returned around the room. The narrative was shifting again. Walter shook his head. I worked myself sick to give you that dream. I know that now, Daniel replied. But back then, all I heard was be practical. Be realistic. Don't aim too high. Walter's face fell. He remembered saying those words. He had thought he was protecting his son from disappointment. Daniel had heard the limitation. The little girl looked confused. Grandpa, you didn't want Daddy to be rich? Walter almost smiled. I wanted him to be safe. Daniel let out a breath that sounded like years escaping his lungs. I thought you didn't believe in me. Walter's hands trembled slightly. I believed in you more than I believed in myself. The truth hit harder than the accusation. A woman at a nearby table wiped her eyes. Someone whispered, This is insane. Daniel looked around the restaurant, at the manager who had nearly removed his father, at the guests who had judged him, at the phones still recording. Then he made a decision. Manager, he said calmly. Yes, sir. How much does this entire floor generate in one night? The manager hesitated. Roughly 120,000, sir. Daniel nodded once. Close it. The manager blinked. Sir, everyone here tonight, Daniel continued, voice steady, is my guest. A collective gasp swept the room. You're all staying, he added. Dinner is on me. Shock turned into stunned silence. But understand something, Daniel said, and now his voice carried weight beyond money. The most important guest in this building tonight was almost asked to leave. The manager's face was drained of color. Walter stiffened. Daniel, that's not necessary. It is, Daniel replied, because I built this place. And if my own father doesn't feel welcome here, then I failed. The shift was complete. Power wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about acknowledgement. The little girl clapped softly. Does that mean Grandpa can sit at the big table? Daniel smiled at her. Yes. Walter hesitated again. Pride and humility wrestling inside him. Dad, Daniel said, quieter now. You taught me to stand up when something's wrong. Let me do that. Walter looked at the polished floors, the chandeliers, the life his son had built. Then he looked at Daniel, not as a billionaire, but as the boy who once fell asleep at the kitchen table doing homework. All right, Walter whispered. Applause broke out, not loud at first, then stronger. Daniel guided his father toward the largest table in the room, the one usually reserved for VIP clients and celebrities. Tonight, it belonged to a retired factory worker. The little girl pulled out a chair dramatically. Sit, Grandpa. Walter sat, and something inside him finally unclenched. Daniel remained standing for a moment longer. There's something else, he said, addressing the room. The attention returned instantly. 19 years ago, I walked away from this man because I thought success meant independence. I thought needing someone was a weakness. He glanced at Walter. I was wrong. The room was silent again, but this time not from tension, from reflection. I built companies, Daniel continued. I built wealth, but I didn't build peace. Walter's eyes glistened. Daniel turned fully toward him. I'm sorry. There it was. No pride, no deflection, just 2 words. Walter didn't speak immediately. He stood instead. For a terrifying second, it looked like he might walk away. Instead, he pulled Daniel into a hug. Not a polite embrace. A firm, shaking, 19 years too late hug. The room erupted. Applause. Tears. Even the manager clapped. The little girl squeezed between them, laughing. Finally. And at that moment, the billionaire wasn't the richest man in the room. The old man wasn't the poorest. They were just father and son. But the night wasn't done yet. Because reconciliation is one thing. Rebuilding is another. And as they sat together at that grand table, another revelation was waiting. One that would shift the story even deeper and prove that the greatest investment Daniel ever made wasn't in tech, or hotels, or real estate. It was something his father had done quietly years ago that Daniel never knew about. And when that truth came out, the entire room would understand what real wealth looks like. Stay with this story because the final piece changes everything. Daniel had just taken his seat when Walter spoke again. There's something you should know, Walter said, voice steady but low. Daniel turned to him. What is it? Walter reached into his coat once more. This time, there was no hesitation. No nervous glances at security. He pulled out a small, creased envelope, yellowed with age. The edges are soft from being handled too many times. Daniel frowned. What's that? Walter placed it gently on the table. The first check. Daniel stared. First check for what? For your company. The words didn't land immediately. Daniel picked up the envelope slowly. Inside was a photocopy of a bank transfer receipt. The date was from over 20 years ago. The amount was small by today's standards. $10,000. But Daniel's hands started to shake. That was my seed money, he whispered. I borrowed this. Walter shook his head. You didn't borrow it. I gave it to you. Daniel's heart began to race. That money came from an anonymous account. I never knew who. I sold the house, Walter said simply. The air left Daniel's lungs. The room froze again. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me, Walter continued. You were angry enough already. I knew if you thought the money came from me, you'd refuse it. Daniel's vision blurred. You sold your house? Walter nodded. It was just walls. You were my future. Daniel pushed his chair back and stood abruptly. That was everything you had. Walter smiled faintly. It was an investment. The little girl looked up at Walter in awe. You made Daddy rich? Walter chuckled. No, sweetheart. He did that himself. Daniel covered his mouth with his hand. For years, he had told the story of the mysterious first investor who believed in him when no one else did. He had imagined a stranger, a lucky break. It had been his father, all along. I thought you didn't support me, Daniel said, voice cracking. You told me to be realistic. I told you to be careful, Walter replied. But I never stopped believing. Daniel stepped back from the table, overwhelmed. The applause didn't come this time. No one moved. It was too heavy for noise. Daniel finally looked around at the room, at the staff, the guests, the cameras. "You see this man?" he said. Heads nodded. "This man is the reason I'm standing here." He turned back to Walter. "And I left you alone." Walter shook his head gently. "You didn't know." Daniel exhaled sharply. "I should have asked." The little girl climbed onto Walter's lap without asking permission. "Grandpa, are you staying with us now?" Walter laughed softly. "That depends." Daniel didn't hesitate. "It doesn't. You are." Walter looked at him, really looked at him. "I don't want to be a burden." Daniel crouched in front of him again, eye level. "You carried me for years. Let me carry you now." Walter's composure finally broke. A single tear escaped. "I don't need your money," Walter said. Daniel nodded. "I know. I need my son." Daniel swallowed hard. "You have him." The little girl clapped her hands again. "Does this mean I can visit Grandpa every day?" Daniel smiled through tears. "Yes." "And can he come to my school?" "Yes." "And can he tell everyone he helped make a billionaire?" Walter laughed, truly laughed, for the first time that night. "Let's not exaggerate." Daniel stood and raised his glass. "To my father," he said, "the richest man I know." This time, the applause was thunderous. Not because of wealth, because of truth. Later that night, as the restaurant slowly returned to normal, people would replay what they had witnessed. A man they had judged by his clothes. A family nearly broken by silence. A child who fixed what pride couldn't. And one lesson echoed in every mind. You can lose years chasing success, and still be poor if you lose the people who love you. As Walter walked out of the hotel, not alone this time, he glanced back once more at the place he had waited for 19 years. He didn't feel the need to come back again. He had what he came for. If the story moved you, don't forget to like the video. It helps more than you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because stories like this deserve to be talked about. And if you believe family, forgiveness, and second chances matter more than money, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't wealth. It's coming home.